Hello everyone, welcome to SJ's classes. In this video lesson, I will be focusing on the literary criticism of the Romantic as well as the Victorian time periods. In case you would like to know more about classical, medieval, Renaissance and neoclassical English literary criticism, please do refer to my earlier video lessons. You can find them on my YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to my channel to get more video lessons on literary criticism. As part of this video lesson, I will be focusing upon two literary critics from the Romantic period, and they are William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And as far as Victorian period is concerned, the greatest contributor to the realm of English literary criticism is Matthew Arnold. So I'll be discussing these three critics in this video lesson. Let's begin with William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was one of the founders of English Romanticism. He is remembered as a poet concerned with the human relationship to nature and a fierce advocate of using the vocabulary and speech patterns of common people in poetry. He was born on April 7, 1770 in the Lake District of England, and he died at Lake District on April 23, 1850. He is best known for lyrical ballads, which was co-written with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and the romantic epic poem, The Prelude, in which he chronicles the growth of a poet's mind. Some of his other popular poems are Intimations of Immortality, The Excursion, and Ecclesiastical Sketches. Some of his prose works include Literary Criticism, Letters of Dorothy and William Wordsworth, and prose works. The literary theory of Wordsworth came to be written between the years 1798 and 1815. During these 17 years, Wordsworth wrote the preface to Lyrical Ballads, the three-part essay, Essay upon Epitaphs, and the prefaces to The Excursion and the Poems. The preface to Lyrical Ballads is the vital essay among all these works. It has always been regarded as the most authentic expression of the ideals of the Romantic movement in English poetry. The first version of 1800 had 7,000 words. The 1802 version had another 3,000 words to it. An appendix of 2,000 words was again added to the 1802 version. Wordsworth pleads for the retention of common speech in poetry. We see Wordsworth in his preface to Lyrical Ballads speak as a representative man speaking to his fellow men. The principal object was to choose incidents and situations from common life and to relate or describe them in a selection of language really used by men, and at the same time to throw over them a certain coloring of imagination, whereby ordinary things should be presented to the mind in an unusual aspect. This is what Wordsworth says his motive was behind writing Lyrical Ballads, and this he explains in his preface to Lyrical Ballads that came out in 1800. It is also in this particular edition of Lyrical Ballads that you find his famous definition for poetry. Good poetry, according to Wordsworth, is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Poetry is not a matter of rules and regulations. The poet is an uncommon man, gifted in many ways and in some sense superior to the common folk. Poetry is not just an intellectual activity. For him, it is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. He also adds that language of good poetry must not differ from that of good prose. He dismissed elevated vocabulary, personification, pathetic fallacy, which is attributing human feelings to inanimate objects. He also dismissed ideas like periphrasis, which means indirect ways of expressing things, inversions, which is the reversal of the normal order of words, and also antithesis, which means using words, phrases which are exact opposite. He also dismissed the use of classical mythology, conceits, hyperbole, and obscurity. So these are my major findings on William Wordsworth. Now let us move into Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, yet another leader of the British Romantic movement, was born on October 21st, 1772 in England, and he died on July 25th, 1834 in London. Coleridge's critical career extended to the 3 decades from 1800 to 1834. It can be categorized into 3 units: his Shakespearean criticism, his critique of Wordsworth, and his comments on various poets. The only critical work that came out in his lifetime was Biographia Literaria, that was published in 1817. The most notable idea explored by Coleridge in his Biographia Literaria is his distinction between fancy and imagination. Now, this has been much explored by the critical world, his concept of fancy and imagination. So it's important for us to understand, to distinguish between these two concepts. He treats imagination as the esemplastic power, or the power that is capable of unifying or building into one. In chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria, Coleridge introduces the distinction between 2 kinds of imagination, the primary and the secondary. Primary imagination is the faculty by which we perceive the world around us. It is merely the power of receiving impressions of the external through our senses. The secondary imagination makes artistic creation possible. It requires a conscious effort. So whereas primary imagination is unconscious, secondary imagination is much more conscious activity. It works upon what is perceived by the primary imagination. So the secondary imagination takes raw materials from the primary imagination and makes it into something which is very much artistic. It selects and orders the raw materials and reshapes and remodels it into objects of beauty. And this is what he calls as the esemplastic power. The secondary imagination is esemplastic, and it dissolves, diffuses, and dissipates in order to create. Dissolves, I'm sure you are aware of the meaning. Diffuses means it spreads, dissipates means to move away from each other. So it dissolves, diffuses, and dissipates in order to create. It does these things to the raw materials that are received from the primary imagination so that it can make an artistic creation out of it. The secondary imagination is at the root of all poetic activity. Let's also look at fancy. Imagination and fancy differ in kind and nature. Whereas imagination is creative, fancy, which is common possession of man, is not creative. It is a mechanical process which receives the elementary images which come to it ready-made, and without altering these fancy, reassembles them into a different order from that in which it was received. It only combines what it perceives into beautiful shapes, but does not fuse or unify. So this is where fancy differs from imagination. It only combines what it perceives, and it combines them into beautiful shapes, but does not fuse or unify. It lacks this unifying aspect, which is actually possessed by our secondary imagination. So that is all about Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now let's move into the Victorian period, and the critic that I shall discuss as part of this particular period is Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold was born on December 24th, 1822 in England, and he died on April 15, 1888 in Liverpool, England. His reputation rests equally upon his poetry and his criticism. Empedocles on Etna, poems, established Arnold's reputation as a poet. Essays in Criticism, Culture and Anarchy, The Function of Criticism, and the Study of Poetry are some of his valuable contributions to English literary criticism. It is in this context that his idea of culture gains prominence. The Arnoldian concept of culture lays stress on the harmonious development of human nature. So it is to be noted that Matthew Arnold was a strong supporter of morality, was someone who stated that England is degrading as far as morality is concerned. It is deteriorating on its moral front. So he spoke much about culture. That is why he stated that his idea of culture is of great importance. The Arnoldian concept of culture lays stress on the harmonious development of human nature. Culture is not just personal equipment, but a social force leading to social progress. Now we very well identify his ideas on culture and the cultural degradation that England was facing through his poem Dover Beach. Now, he had this opinion that he, along with other major writers, had this responsibility of reinstalling that fine culture into English society. And culture and the English society was developing, was progressing at many sides, but as far as culture is concerned, England was deteriorating. Culture is described by Arnold in his first essay, Sweetness and Light, in the work Culture and Anarchy. The work Culture and Anarchy is a series of periodical essays written as a political and social critique, and it came out in 1869. And he describes culture as having its origin in the love of perfection. According to Arnold, culture is a study of perfection. It materializes by the moral and social compassion for doing good. Arnold had a high view of poetry, and most of his ideas related to poetry, which can be found in the work Study of Poetry that came out in 1880. In it, he states that only poetry can provide self-assurance and nourishment to mankind in the tough times that England was in. This made it necessary to keep the best of poetry as the models. I hope you are aware of the concept that I am coming to. The concept that I am coming to is touchstone method. So this forms the underlying basis of his touchstone method. This is a term coined by Matthew Arnold. He introduced the term in his essay Study of Poetry, which came out in 1880, to denote short but distinctive passages selected from the writing of great poets, which he used to determine excellence of passages or poems which are compared to them. To prevent the interpretations of poems based on touchstone method from being very much mechanical, he quotes 11 passages, 3 from Homer, 3 from Dante, 3 from Milton, and 2 from Shakespeare for these purposes, or to serve as touchstones. The first prose work of Arnold was the preface to Poems of 1853, and for the remaining 35 years of his life he indulged with great relish in prose writing. In his preface, he rejected the poetry of the Romantics and the Elizabethans and favored poems which are particular, precise, and firm, dealing with human actions and that which appeal to human feelings. His statements regarding some of the Romantics are very popular. Let's look at some of them. He called Shelley a beautiful and ineffectual angel, beating in the void his luminous wings in vain. Now about poet, he has stated that Coleridge is a poet and philosopher wrecked in the midst of opium. Look at his statement on Keats. He says, Keats' letters were called as love letters of a surgeon's apprentice. Let's also look at one of the other important contributions that he has made towards the realm of English literary criticism, and that is the function of criticism at the present time. It is yet another significant contribution made by Arnold. The essay was originally published in the National Review in 1864. In it, he states that the critic has a social function to perform. The critic must steer clear of the practical and political considerations and should be able to make a free play of mind on all the subject it touches. Disinterestedness must be practiced, and it should be understood that the function of criticism is to know and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world, and thereby create a current of true and fresh ideas. He adds that for good literature to flourish, two powers are necessary, the creative and the critical. It is a critical power that lets a creative mind see the object as in itself it really is. Some of his other contributions to the English literary criticism are his inaugural lecture on the modern element literature, which was delivered in 1857 at Oxford as a professor of poetry, then on translating Homer, which came out in 1861, and also Essays in Criticism, first series, which was published in 1865. A second series followed posthumously in 1888. A third series with the title Essays in Criticism, third series, came out in 1910. All these are revised versions of the first edition. So these are some of the important contributions of Matthew Arnold towards English literary criticism. With this, we come to the end of this video lesson. Thank you so much for watching. Please do subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can get more video lessons on topics related to English literary criticism. Thank you.